Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part there for the 26th of August 2024. I did do a kind of extra hits and losses video just before this one to update you on the Andrew Perpetua loss lists for the weekend that he was working on a backlog and he produced them at the end of the weekend, and so I just did a little discussion on those. Just a very public thanks to Andrew and his team for doing all the heavy lifting with regard to data collection and analysis. Really, really important for what I do, and I'm sure for a good open source intelligence analysis of what's going on in the war. I do wonder quite often how much attention like national armed forces pay and intelligence services pay to people like Andrew Perpetua and the work they do, because it's incredible the time and effort. My opinion would be, if I was the UK or American armed forces, I'd be paying Andrew Perpetua under the table, like, keep doing that, mate. I don't want you quitting, because, and can we give you anyone else to help you? It doesn't seem to be happening, and it blows my mind, because they are so valuable with giving us a greater understanding of what is going on in this war. Okay, so the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course. It is as follows for the last 24 hours: 1,140 personnel lost, 4 tanks, which is pretty much where it's been below the daily average, 17 AFVs, so APCs, MRAPs, IFVs, armored personnel carriers, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, and infantry fighting vehicles. All of those troop-carrying fighting vehicles have, 17 is about the daily average. 47 artillery systems, over double the daily average, about where it's been for day upon day there. The Russians just seem to lose huge amounts of artillery, and yet we don't always see that reflected in the visually confirmed losses. And that is because, for a number of reasons, because the satellite imagery that's poured over isn't usually in the area where artillery systems are kept. So if you're looking at charred remains of BMPs and tanks and you're adding those to the list, you're not going to see charred remains of artillery, because they're 20 kilometers behind a contact line, and you're not looking at satellite imagery from 20 kilometers behind a contact line. You don't have that time in the day, you don't have that desire or need, and so you miss out a lot of already destroyed artillery pieces and the evidence for that. And also, a lot of it's taken out by counter battery fire. So if you are tracking where the ordnance is coming from, then you plug that into a computer, or the radar works it all out, and the computer says, okay, that was coming from these coordinates, and then you send your artillery to hit those coordinates. But you're not always looking at that with a spotter drone. It's just done through your radar analysis, etc., etc. And there are all these other ways of taking out artillery, and it's not always caught on camera, or it is caught on camera, but it's not so viewer exciting, right? So when you see a tank fundamentally disassemble and throw its turret up to the moon, that looks good, and so you upload that to the socials. When you hit the kind of the tail, or the loading part of a D-30 howitzer, and there's no big explosion, it's just like the FPV drone goes blank as it approaches and hits, then you're like, okay. And then you may catch it on spotter drone and you see like a tiny puff of smoke in a tree line. You're like, yeah, okay, we've got 30 bits of that footage, we'll probably upload one. There's no point doing 30. Sometimes they then drop a montage of all that, and Andrew Perpetua showed a couple of those, I think, recently, and that's why we saw some much greater numbers of artillery. Anyway, I know I say this often, and some people attack me for repeating myself. You've got to understand that 50% of my viewers are unique every day, and so they'll come across this stuff, and if I don't explain things, and they may never know. One piece of multiple launch rocket system, one piece of anti-aircraft warfare equipment, 80 vehicles and fuel tanks, another massively high number in that category, and 13 pieces of special equipment. So we are seeing, I think, a movement from tanks and troop-carrying AFVs across to vehicles and fuel tanks, as I think they are replacing those more bespoke military vehicles with generic civilian vehicles as a needs must basis, That is a case of quads, golf buggies, and motorbikes being used. Now, it's not to say they don't have a use, and they can be pretty successful in using them, but I just don't think it's ideal. Right then, when we look at the overall loss stats from Andrew Perpetua for the same sort of time period, although there will be a lag between the general staff figures and what's recorded in open source video and imagery, we have Andrew seeing that the Russians have lost a few pieces more than the Ukrainians, but it's almost a 1-to-1 loss ratio. Of course, I always say the Russians need to be losing 3 times as much as the Ukrainians in order for the Ukrainians to prevail in the war. We have a radar, ST-68U radar, being damaged. That's going to be fairly high value there. Lancet hitting the ground in front of the radar, so not a direct hit, not uncommon for the Lancet. But yeah, we got here. If you look at the causes for all the Ukrainian losses, it's quite an interesting mix here. You got Lancet FPV drone shelling, mine, night vision, fell in a hole, hit by a drone, abandoned, hit by a drone. So collateral damage to an FPV drone, quite a range, and then Lancet again at the bottom, Lancet there. Lancet is still an issue, of course. We have a UGV taken out, damaged at least, a Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicle. So then on to your combat asset losses. Self-propelled gun, a few tanks there, most of them unknown. Captured BMP-2, a couple of abandoned Bradleys and a damaged Bradley. That's 3 more Bradleys to add to what I was talking about in the previous video. I think the Ukrainians are going to be needing a shipment of Bradleys pretty damned quickly. They are going through them quite consistently at levels that are not sustainable if they're not repeatedly being given equipment. I saw an argument. Ukraine Battle Map was replying to a Russian troll, like an outright pro-Russian poster, saying that something to do. Someone had said the Ukrainians need a sufficient number of American equipment in order to sustain the war, or something like that. And the Russian was like, yeah, if they have a sufficient amount of equipment, the Americans wouldn't be able to sufficiently defend themselves or something. And then Ukraine Battle Map was like, this is how many Bradleys they have. This is how many they've given to Ukraine. This is how many tanks they have. 2 to 4,000 M1 Abrams, and they've given 31 to Ukraine. This is the amount of howitzers they got. This is how many, and it's like there are just thousands and thousands of Bradleys sitting, gathering dust in Arizona or wherever. And the Americans could easily give a lot more. And I think they probably are giving the Ukrainians enough Bradleys. We might not always hear about it. I do wonder whether everything is overtly explicitly communicated, or whether there are sometimes deliveries that aren't. I don't know. It does seem like the Americans are fairly transparent, to be honest. But with Bradleys, that's the most useful vehicle, in my opinion, more useful than a tank, because it can do broadly what most tanks can do, and it's more maneuverable, lighter, and can carry troops. Anyway, they've lost 3 more Bradleys, 2 abandoned, 1 damaged. We got a Senator APC given or sold by the Canadian Rochelle company there, an MRAP, a max power MRAP, and some civilian vehicles as well. Okay, Russians have lost a few more. Let's see what the value is. A Mi-8 helicopter, probably the one hit by an FPV drone early in the Kursk offensive. So that was one of the FPV claims, that it hit the tail rotor and then had a hard landing. We had no evidence of a hard landing, but now imagery has come out of that Mi-8. Where is it? You are here somewhere. There it is. So that's a Mi-8 that has had a fairly hard landing there. Doesn't seem to be in very good shape. Cost of such a helicopter is $14 million, depending on modifications, equipment, and additional options. Russians complained that their Mi-8 helicopter was able to avoid heavy fire, but later had to make a hard landing. And the claim is that is probably shot down in the Kursk region. All the crew allegedly survived. Enemy channels write that the bird was simply put down hard. It could likely be the one that was damaged by an FPV drone. Right. Anyway, so that's going to be already, taking up most of the loss list here of the Ukrainian losses in terms of value. Of course, there are different ways of equating value, calculating value. Two recovery vehicles, a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system is destroyed there. TOS-1A thermobaric launcher damaged. An MTLB with RBU-6000, so that's one of those. I think the naval, or the submarine, and is it anti-submarine rockets or whatever they are? It's that naval rocket launcher on the top of the MTLB, and then we have D20s and 30s. For the tanks, they're all damaged. So one with a mine roller. So that's good for the Russians. They are potentially all recoverable and fixable, but maybe not. Who knows where it took place? Infantry fighting vehicles, 3 destroyed there, 100% destroyed. And then a few APCs damaged and abandoned, trucks and civilian vehicles, normal stuff there. So not the greatest amount of combat asset losses for the Russians, but take into account particularly the Mi-8 multiple launch rocket system, TOS-1A, and recovery vehicles are also pretty useful too. Okay, moving on, we have from the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine has apparently captured at least 247 Russian soldiers since its incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast began on August 6th, according to the Washington Post analysis of visual evidence. So let's understand properly what's being said here. This isn't to say that they've only caught 247. This is exactly what BBC Russia and Mediazona do, which is say, right, what's the benchmark minimum of Russian soldiers captured or Russian soldiers killed with the BBC analysis. So this is what we definitely know. The real number will be much higher than that, or somewhat higher than that, or at least higher than that. With the captured here, the Washington Post has looked at all the video evidence that's been publicly available and said, we have noted at least 247 individual soldiers that have been captured. Now, we already know it's more than that, because I'm fairly sure one of the prison analyses is we've had 300 something captured soldiers into this prison, 80% of them are conscripts. So that's already one analysis that shows at least more than that. So this is your benchmark minimum. What the maximum is, I don't know, but there have been claims previously of would be over 2,000 now, because that claim was from sort of 4 or 5 days ago. So you've had claims from several hundred up to 2,000. The likelihood is it's somewhere in between those two points. It's at least 247. That's your benchmark minimum that we know have been captured. Now, Andrew Perpetua talking about stats. He, as mentioned, has released those 2 from the weekend, and then a third one today that we've just looked at. He's also been counting up Russian, and this sounds really macabre, but he's doing it from a statistical point of view. Lots of people have had a go at him for this. This is, I think, very useful. It's a horrible thing to have to do, or to feel you have to do, but I think it's statistically very useful. So this is your benchmark minimal losses in terms of these are the numbers of Russian troops in the videos that he looks at. So he looks at this whole range of videos every day, and he tots up the losses. He geolocates them, on the type of losses, whether it's damaged or destroyed, where it happened, and puts that into loads of spreadsheets and databases, blah, blah, blah. And he's also doing this now. He's been doing it for a week, I think, or 6 days in terms of Russian personnel losses. So videos where there's a human being who has definitely died. And I've watched that, and I'm gonna notch that up on a ledger just to get a sense of possibly, the accuracy, maybe looking at trends, maybe looking at the accuracy of general staff claims against visually confirmed, and see what the difference is. You will get a vast difference between the general staff claims that say in a single day you've got 1,140 people dead, wounded, captured, and deserted. So that's a much larger category there. But now Andrew Perpetua said, look, in this last 24 hours, I have seen 99 people physically, I've visually seen that confirmed that they have died in the videos I've been looking at. It's not to say that all those videos are from yesterday, but in the day that I've looked at these videos that they were published, probably published in the last 24 hours, that's what I've seen. And then in the whole 6 days, actually that was a heavier day. The previous 6 days have amounted to, with that as well, to 388 losses over 6 days. Make of that what you will, derive whatever conclusion you can from that. It will be, I think, interesting to see if you could do that over a much longer time period. You could see whether there are trends that track losses from the general staff figures that are spiking. So, say I don't know, Kursk, for example, took place, and you saw figures spiking up there, or before that, Kharkiv happened, and the Russian loss figures spiked. Then, would you be able to track those spikes with visually confirmed personnel losses as well to see whether the Russian losses that are reported by the general staff are accurate or not in terms of trends? And then the question is, as with vehicles, what's the difference between visually confirmed and claimed from the general staff, and is there a consistent difference? Anyway, we talked about the Mi-8 helicopter. Right, going on to official video of Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade with footage of ambushes on vehicles with the Russians here. I'm not going to show you this because I'll get into trouble with YouTube, but there's quite a lot of footage coming out at the moment, some from Kursk, some from other places such as Pokrovsk area. This is US supplied M1128 Strikers, the APCs, armored personnel carrier, although some of them will have the ability to be effectively IFVs because they do have armaments on top. British Challenger 2 tank as well involved in this operation. Apparently more than 20 soldiers were captured, several destroyed as well. So that's a successful operation caught on that camera. Go and check it out. In the Kursk Oblast, and I do wonder how often this is happening in Kursk, the Ukrainian armed forces seized an ammo warehouse and Russian police cars. Quote, this can only be explained by the panicked retreat of Russian troops. They fled so fast that they didn't even have time to burn it, according to Denis Kazansky there. So, of course, that's a completely zero-sum game there, where the loss of the Russians is a gain of the Ukrainians. They get to capture. Captures are really good, aren't they, compared to destroyed. So they'd much rather, obviously, capture an ammo warehouse intact. Right, okay. American donated M1 Abrams tanks are working extremely efficiently, says War Monitor, in the Pokrovsk direction, and have destroyed significant amounts of Russian forces equipment in repelling assaults. So the M1 Abrams being used well there. They've lost a few of them, and they were only supposedly given 31. There were some rumors that was doubled, but I don't know that that's true at all. So let's assume there's only 31. I mean, I heard this personally myself from a contact that the UK gave double the amount of Challenger 2 tanks that was officially signaled. I don't know if that's definitely true or not. So, these are all hearsay, although you do kind of rate hearsay coming from people in the know. Anyway, the new tactic of the Ukrainian drone units is to track Russian drones and then follow them undetected to locate and observe the Russian rear areas. This is coming from, I don't know whether this is a Ukrainian source. We'll go through it, actually, read it to you. I mentioned this yesterday. I can't say how effective it is, but the enemy may be testing a new tactic in places. So this is a Russian source, but I'm not sure. When several other drones hang on the tail of our drone and fly after it, at plus or minus the same azimuth and altitude, respectively, at about the same speed. What is the goal? I don't know. What types of reconnaissance or kamikaze? I don't know. I assume the idea is this: to fly in together with ours to conduct reconnaissance of the rear zones, or a kamikaze flight to increase its range. Oh, by the way, this is not a tale from the smoking room or Uncle Vazia heard with the wrong ear, told one to another, etc. Before this, a couple of drone units encountered such a situation. Well, and then I myself have encountered such a situation several times already. I want to note the competent work of the air defense, which informs about this and cuts off enemy birds. So, not sure whether it is just to check out the rear areas. Obviously, that's going to be super important. You'd also think they'd be trying to strike at drone crews who are having their drones returned to them. Not all drones are kamikaze, so you will have drone IED dropping drones that will come back to you. You'll fly them back because you want to use them again. Or the larger drones like hexacopter, octocopter drones. I don't know how many of those the Russians use, but if they are being followed back, then you can see where the drone teams are positioned and then hammer the drone teams themselves. That's a really high value target for drone operators. And I guess it's a bit like, was it Enemy Behind the Gates? Was that Ed Harris film with, who else was it? Was it Jude Law? About Stalingrad, where they sniper against sniper, and there's something about taking out the same type of person from the opposition. Loads of sniper films. There's one that was released recently. I can't remember what it's called. Uh, Set out in the Middle East somewhere. Anyway, yeah, so there will be a certain buzz from a drone team taking out another drone team, but also it's incredibly high value as a target. The amount of damage these drone teams can do. Very bad news from Crimea. Saboteurs killed 18 soldiers, says a Russian source. According to sources in the Ministry of Defense and among the military personnel located on the peninsula, the emergency occurred on Saturday, August the 24th. Unknown persons attacked a field camp near Simferopol. There, the soldiers were preparing to be sent to the Zaporizhia direction of the front. Quote, unknown people killed 18 soldiers with knives. Everyone died in their sleep. However, how the saboteurs got into the camp and how they escaped from there, we do not yet fully understand. These bastards are very well prepared, said one of our interlocutors. Wow. If that is true, that is a significant loss for the Russians, and I hope there are no local repercussions. But that's it's not the first time we've heard of such a thing happening over the last few years. That has happened a number of times. Zelensky announced that around Putin's dacha in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, there are air defense systems in Russia. So we have actually seen satellite imagery and video imagery of Pantsirs set around Sochi, his place in Sochi, and elsewhere. But in small towns like the one in the Kursk region where we stopped, there is nothing. So Zelensky calling out, you would understand why this happens, but calling out Russia on protecting the many dachas and palaces that Putin has and not protecting his own civilians in some of these places. Ouch. Then we have more evidence of widespread fires. Does everything Russia touches burn? Asks Tim White. Illegally annexed Crimea is in flames. 15 hectares of land is on fire near, good luck, Pierce, or Jonidkije. It's not known how it started, but villages are being evacuated. Then we have a train on fire here. In Russia, a locomotive is on fire in Ilyanovsk. So someone set fire to that, it seems, or it's had a drone land on top. I don't know how far that is from Ukraine. Then we hear this. So fascinating. Okay. Igor Sushko says Russia leaked audio of Russian Railways Deputy Managing Director Sergei Kobzev in a meeting with his subordinates in which he threatens them with execution by firing squad if they fail him. He says the Russian rail network is on a precipice of total collapse 4 days away. He says that unless they do X, Y, and Z. We are together making plans. We are 4 days away from a complete shutdown of the rail network on all the tragedies, firing squads and associated matters, and so on. We find ourselves in this condition. Therefore, I ask everyone to get this out of your heads. Blah, blah, blah. So interesting leaked footage there, leaked audio, which is on the back of something that Igor Sushko himself posted on August 5th. Russian Railways Deputy Head Sergei Kobzev told his subordinates the situation is critical. A complete collapse of the entire railway network in Russia could happen in days. So this is obviously now we're 20 days on from this and this hasn't happened, but it was reported that he said this and then the leaked audios come out. Railroad chiefs ordered to work to the limit and threatened with dismissal and execution for failure. This has been talked about by a number of people. Trentelenko keeps talking about this. We have seen the Ukrainians target certain elements of the Russian rail network. We've also seen them take Sudzha in Kursk, which has given them potentially a lot of information on the railway network in Russia, access to the computers and paperwork concerning that. And it could be that the Ukrainians are going to work on Russia's a railway nation because it's so huge, right? You cripple the railway logistics, you cripple a large degree of how the nation operates. So yeah, that's really potentially really significant. Okay, now we get on to massive news, and this is really, really bad news for Ukraine. We have one of the biggest attacks, and we've been waiting for this. I've been talking about this for some time. You will get a big missile and drone attack on Ukraine. They are stockpiling. So we've had over 100 drones and 60 missiles of various types were launched at Ukraine in the few hours of the morning of 26th of August. I don't know if that's now what the latest numbers are. There's just an awful lot of imagery coming out. If you look at the socials, more and more information. Me-24 helicopter chase and shot down Shahid. Well, things to look at. Anyway, lots of imagery of the destruction of what took place yesterday. What do we have? Over 80 drones and dozens of missiles. So here we've heard 100 drones and 60 missiles. We'll see what the numbers are. However, as bad as this is, the fact that you don't have the most amount of missiles sent since the beginning of the war is itself significant. So this is a massive overwhelming of the Ukrainian air defenses, but it's probably not as bad as it should have been had Russia the capacity to do more. I think they can't do more, and so so some people are saying they've thrown everything at this, and if this is everything, this is the most that Russia can possibly do short of nuclear missiles to Ukraine. Then, as bad as last night was, it's not as bad as you might think. I'm not trying to paint the picture as positively as I keep saying for Ukraine. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to think, critically about what's going on. If I was Russia, what would I be doing? Well, I would be trying to do this as often as possible. The fact that we are 2.5 years into the war and they've done this now, they didn't do this 3 weeks ago, they didn't do this a month ago, they didn't do this 2 months ago, shows that they're having to stockpile and work really hard to produce this amount of stuff to send into Ukraine, and they can't do it as often as you would want if you were trying to really properly cripple Ukraine as soon as possible. So anyway, in this video, most likely Odessa was rocked by numerous explosions this morning. 15 regions have been affected by a massive Russian attack today, says Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. The Russians used various types of weapons, drones, cruise missiles, and Kinzhal missiles. Energy infrastructure was again targeted. There is damage in a number of regions. So bad news, massive Russian attack across Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. People are sheltering in the subway in Kiev in this video. We haven't seen this for a long time, the massive use of subways to protect civilians. People have got used to these strikes. They've been normalized, and actually places like Kiev, there have been really good air defenses, so you feel relatively safe. So even when the sirens go off, people stay in their flats and houses and whatever workplaces because they think, our air defense is going to take care of this. They must have been told that this one was a big one, and actually their air defenses would not be able to cope with the sheer mass of ordnance being sent in. And so we are seeing images of huge numbers of people in the subways. I've seen some video of them singing national anthems, so trying to stay united. Crowds in Kiev hiding from Russian missiles and Shahids supplied by Iran that Ukraine on it that have been sent into Ukraine on its Independence Day. I think that was actually yesterday, Independence Day. But Russians hit a dam of Kiev water reservoir dam. So this is significant. This is what you don't want to see. There are all those dams going down Dnipro River in the Kiev region where if one goes, then goodness me, that you think Novokakhovka was bad, you start seeing what happened if they take out these dams here. So this is really freaking significant here. Now, luckily, I think it's not substantial enough to cause huge problems, but damage to dam in Kiev. Tim White has a substantial thread on all of this. Let's try and dip into a few claims here. Ukraine's air defense has been working hard all night. He said 6 hours ago, about 20 drones came in the first wave. We hope that may be it. But then the second wave of Russian drone attacks saw another 50 plus mopeds. And that was 6 hours ago. And that has continued since then. Russia's been hit overnight, but we'll come to that later. Drones everywhere, rockets and drones everywhere. Scary stuff, he said again 6 hours ago. Poltava, Kropyvnytsky, and Vinnytsia, etc., etc. Air alarms going off everywhere. What we know so far, he said 6 hours ago, 4 or 5 explosions in the last few minutes, more missiles in the region in Kharkiv, in Poltava, in Vinnytsia, in all those Kryvyi Rih, all those places. Explosions, repeated explosions in Dnipro, Khmelnytsky, all the usual places. I mean, they've targeted a whole host of places around Ukraine. And then if we sort of forward on, hypersonic Kinzhan missile threat. Khmelnytsky, media in Russia published this video, allegedly from the city this morning, taken from a window. Shouldn't take authorities too long to find out who uploaded that, though. So the other thing to note is that I'd note that despite the significant scale of this morning's missile and drone attack on Ukraine, says Dmitry from War Translated, there's relatively little footage of the aftermath, suggesting strong Ukrainian discipline in keeping the information out of Russian hands. So something like this might get some comeback for the person who filmed it, and they might end up in a good degree of trouble, as the Ukrainians keep a tight OPSEC on these strikes. Kiev targeted, so on and so forth. There's an awful lot of footage and information coming out. Odessa suffers power outages. So there have been unconfirmed reports at Kiev City Airport. Zylyani has been hit. Power cuts reported in Kiev, Kryvyi Rih, and Mykolaiv. Apparently, they're scheduling shutdowns for the power network to try and deal with the issues. Air Defense did their best in Odessa, but at least one has snuck through. Energy bosses confirmed widespread outages in both Odessa and Kiev, while minor outages reported in many other places. So on and so forth. So, and then we've only got up to 5 hours ago. So just, strikes all over the shop. Indeed, a telethon was on camera when their cameras cut out. This video has done the rounds of a guy supposedly shooting with a heavy machine gun from the back of his ute at a cruise missile, and the claims were he shot down a cruise missile. Actually, it wasn't. It was hit by a surface-to-air missile system before he hit, which made it look like he hit it, but actually he hadn't. And in fact, I think the full video, he at the end says, yes, it was taken down by SAM. So don't be sucked in by that one. Although it's great they shot it down, but it was a SAM that took it out, supposedly. More explosions in Lutsk, places over to the west. Zakarpattia as well, I think. Another death confirmed there. The number of drones fired into Ukraine has topped 100, he said 4 hours ago, somewhere around 40 missiles at that point. In Lutsk, a second building was hit, according to the regional governor. Emergency services at work. Here, water's already been restored to some properties, but in a wider region, injury to people and houses damaged. Mykolaiv, Zhytomyr, all over the shop. I mean, normally I'd spend a few minutes on say one of these strikes, but they're just happening everywhere and so consistently. So massive strikes. We'll, I guess, find out the true depth of damage that's been done to Ukraine over the next few days. But as I say, I assume that's the most Russia are going to be able to do, and probably for some time. Be interesting to see if you have because, like, if I was Russia, if that's you've got several things to consider: the amount of ordnance you've got and the amount of planes that can take up that ordnance. So it could be that's the most amount you could do in a given night. You don't have the planes to be able to release any more by the time they come back, and you've got to refuel them. Blah blah blah. So what'd be interesting is if I was a Russian leader, I'd be like, right, let's do that again tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after. Now, if they can do that, it means, hey, they don't have too much of an issue with procuring ordnance. If they can't do that, and we wait another week or 2 weeks before any other kind of drone strikes or missile strikes, then they are really struggling with missile and drone procurement production. So, yeah, I guess we'll have to wait to tonight to see if anything further happens. Now, Andrew Perpetua is pretty angry. He says Ukraine needs to perform an all-out strike on the Russian electrical grid. Send every resource they have to take out as much of it as possible. Western countries should help Ukraine too, but helping mass-produce drones, start generating 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 drones per month, and just keep hitting the electric grid. Exactly what I've been saying, not necessarily about the electric grid, but Ukraine needs to be producing distance munitions at a massively significant number. What they are doing to the oil depots and, say, the locomotives as rail network, they should be, that shouldn't be happening once a week. That should be happening every single night. You win this war by crippling Russia in a really significant way, militarily, logistically. And the argument from Andrew here is also with the electric grid. Now, you might say that that's affecting civilian infrastructure too much. And then you have this argument of what's military, what's civilian, and actually is hitting civilian infrastructure justifiable in bringing about a greater good. So this idea of like, can war crimes justify greater good rather than war crimes for the sake of war crimes? And what I mean by this is to refer to something like, and I know this is before kind of the war crimes were a framework for them was created. But if you go back to Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there you have destruction of entire cities and hundreds of thousands of civilians killed like that. Now, if that happened these days, there would be a massive, massive uproar. I mean, there was at the time, but the idea was that this was a risk to see that whether something terrible could bring about the end of a war that would have brought about more deaths. So you can, of course, you can build up a similar sort of case to say, well, if they struck Russian electricity infrastructure right across Russia and stopped their population being able to have power, would that cause the Russian population to stand up and overthrow the government, or at least put pressure on it to stop the war and then bring about this greater good? So he says, I guarantee 100% if Ukraine started wiping entire regions of Russia off the grid, electrical grid that is, Russia would never strike the Ukrainian power grid again. They would beg for an agreement to stop the strikes because no electric power in Russia equals a Russian revolution. Electric power is possibly the only thing that Russians actually care about in this world. Everything else they don't seem to care. Their children dying? Don't care. Extreme inflation? Don't care. Losing your job? Don't care. Electric power? Time to rebel. Interesting point there. And I'd be interested to see what you guys think about that. Okay, Ukrainian soldiers from an air defense unit in western Zakarpattia. That one that I showed you just now of the guy shooting down that drone, supposedly, although it was, as Ilya Ponomarenko says, a report. I think the missile in the video was actually down with the Ukrainian SAM behind the scene. That was the gunner. This is what the gunner says immediately after the downing, quote, Sam downed it. Makes sense to me and explains the situation. Now that's being generally accepted. But why I've come back to this is that was in Zakarpattia, that's where James from Wine Ukraine lives, which is on near the Hungarian border. I mean, it's well out of the way. So obviously trying to strike. So that's the sort of place you'd try and put some highly sensitive, I don't know, infrastructure, maybe a defense manufacturing facility. You want to put that out the way. So it could be why that you're seeing missiles go there. Now we have a missile. The sound of these as well is quite incredible. Now, I won't show you that, but there's a big explosion there. So you see that missile coming in. And then a big explosion there. And that's on an apartment building in Lutsk. So the question is that what it was aiming for? Is that... Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I can't control my fingers very well. Is it what it was aiming for? Is it close to what it's aiming for? In other words, part of the circle error probable. It was just slightly inaccurate, or was it brought down by electronic warfare, etc., etc.? So that's worth considering. Then we have a Russian missile landing in the water here. So you see it just coming across there, coming across that picture. And there you see a tiny black speck there as it comes across the screen and then lands in the water. And there you've got a huge explosion in the water. Again, same question. Is that circle error you can assume they're not aiming for some water, right? So it's either CEP or it is electronic warfare that's brought it down. So, either inaccurate or electronic warfare. Ukraine's answer so having said all of that, so that's what Russia did last night. Then it appears that Ukraine has done something this morning as a response. A powerful explosion has been heard at Gazprom Neft oil refinery in Omsk. What's important about this is the biggest facility, I think, in Russia. More videos are appearing regarding the smoldering Gazprom Neft oil refinery in Omsk. The refinery is the largest refinery in Russia and has been in operation since 1955, producing 50 different types of oil products. So, if they have successfully been able to hit that, that is huge, and you might expect to see more drones. Now, that could be that was indeed a reaction to what the Russians did, an immediate reaction, and it wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it might be that they are saying to themselves, right, we can hit that. Let's go and just throw loads of ordnance at that refinery and see what Russia does in response. Now, last night, there were some drone attacks, probably pre-arranged drone attacks on particularly Saratov, which is where the Engels 2 airbase is. Now, you saw a drone slam into the side of a building, a residential building here. And again, the question is that the target? Was that the target? Is this circle error probable? CEP inaccurate. It was actually aiming for something over here, or was it electronic warfare that brought it down? Or maybe it was intercepted and skewed off course or something. So those are your options. Now, I would assume that the Ukrainians, with their very scarce resources and with the very delicate situation of what does the international community think of what we're doing, and having to play things by the rules in order to keep people on side, are not going to be aiming on purpose at an apartment block 300 kilometers away, right? 400, however far Saratov is away. You could do that in Belgorod. If you wanted to hit an apartment block, you would do that just over the border, or you would do that in Donetsk, right? Or probably more likely in someone like Belgorod, Kursk, or Rostov on Don. So therefore, we can be fairly confident that they didn't do that on purpose. This is only relatively close to the Engels airbase, so it's much more likely that it was brought off course by electronic warfare or was inaccurate in trying to hit Engels airbase, which is an incredibly important airbase to hit, because that's where they release. That's where a lot of their planes take off to do the sorts of things that we saw last night that the Russians did to the Ukrainians. In Russian city of Saratov, drones shot down by local air defense over the city have hit several residential buildings, including a 38-story high-rise. That's, I think, the tallest building there. We don't know whether they succeeded in striking anything militarily important in Saratov. The claims are from the Russians that they shot everything down and that there were quite a few drones in the Saratov area. We've also seen a drone attempt to attack an oil refinery in Yaroslav. It's reported by the governor of Yaroslav region, Mikhail Evraev, that a drone was destroyed on the approach to Yaroslav. At the site of its fall, there is no damage or victims. In addition, drones attacked the Volgograd region. Governor of the region, Andrei Bocharov, reports that the result of the fall of the debris, the two downed drones in Yelansky district, damaged a residential house and two non-residential buildings. So Russians are claiming that Ukrainians sent a bunch of drones in, they shot them all down, blah, blah, blah. How true that is, I am not sure. We have also seen in the Moscow region the work of a Pantsir S1 installed on the top of some, it says turret here, I think that's like a scaffolding framework as opposed to like a block of flats or something. This is fairly significant because the Pantsir is a decent bit of kit, and there it is firing at something in the Moscow region, and I think taking it down as well. So yeah, that's worth noting. I've already gone through Tim White's stuff there. What else can we look at? No, that's in the wrong place. So we're going to go to the Proletarsk oil depot that's been burning now for 9 days. Special Kherson Cat here talks about shares Mark Krutov's satellite imagery that I shared yesterday, your daily update there, that day 8, no significant improvements. So if you remember from yesterday, it appears that the fire's reignited in some reservoirs and seems to have been extinguished. That had been seemingly extinguished in previous images. Actually, so now Mark Krutov says so this is it. According to local sources, the fire is expected to be fully extinguished in approximately 2 days. That was on August the 18th. We're now August 26th. and he says that it didn't age well, or did it? A new cluster of reservoirs caught fire yesterday at the Prolatarsk oil depot in Russia, which has been burning for 9 days in a row following the August the 18th Ukrainian drone strikes. High resolution image taken on the 25th there. So that was yesterday at 2:41 local time, so almost 24 hours ago. And you can see flames are still burning in a number of those, not just sort of smoke. That's flames. And yeah, comparison of Planet high resolution satellite images of the depot taken on the 23rd and 25th reveals a new fire hotspot in the western part. So he's keeping an eye on that. And yeah, we can't say exactly when it happened, but it was no later than August the 23rd when this hotspot first appeared on the LR imagery. In all other imagery, it's covered with smoke. In other words, there is active fires still burning there. It appears, or at least there were yesterday. Now, to go to the strike on Kramatorsk yesterday that the Russians uh, carried out, and it seemed to be a purposeful attack on a hotel that contained foreign and domestic journalists. Reuters have now sadly admitted that Ryan Evans was killed. He's a British journalist. Two other journalists were injured there. Reuters journalists, I think. He was killed. I think he was. There's a sad, horrific bit of irony that he was a safety evaluator. I think that was your safety advisor. There it is, safety advisor, and he was the one who ended up being killed. So that's tremendously sad. What I am always interested in finding out is what is the international reaction to this. Because it should be that countries are up in arms that Russia has seemingly struck at foreign journalists trying to do their job and reporting on the war. What do the British say to this? What do other nations involved in these sort of strikes say to this? And does it bring about further rhetoric and action against Russia, or is it just, oh, there you go, some more of our boys were killed trying to report on this war in Ukraine, struck purposefully by the Russians? Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. So, Conrad Conrad Musica from Rochan Consulting said, "Here's a brief overview of the situation." What are we talking about? Well, there are claims of massive Belarusian forces gathering on the Ukrainian-Belarus border. Right. He says a few weeks ago, Belarusian forces began conducting various exercises that we believe are preparations for a large-scale bilateral drill involving one operational command against another. Although this concept isn't new, the Russians first implemented it in a large scale in 2019. Minsk only conducted a drill of this magnitude for the first time last year in September. We closely monitored the drill and provided clear warnings and recommendations that it was purely an exercise. Our current assessment links the recent build-up near Ukraine to the 2024 iteration of the bilateral exercise. While many aspects of this year's drill are similar to those in 2023, the concentration area has notably shifted. The deployment of forces into Gomel Oblast, which served as a staging area for Russian troops during the 2022 attack on Kyiv, is particularly concerning. While it is crucial to remain vigilant and closely monitor Minsk's actions, intentions, methods, and their potential impact, we assess that it is unlikely Belarus is considering offensive action against Ukraine at this stage. Our long-term assessment is that Belarusian armed forces primarily function as a mobilization force, which would require a significant increase in manpower through mobilization to conduct any offensive operations. Even then, their forces primarily rely on post-Soviet equipment that has seen minimal modernization, leaving them ill-equipped for contemporary battlefield demands. Additionally, Ukraine has heavily fortified and mined many areas along the border with Belarus, meaning any attack from Belarus would require an overwhelming amount of force to succeed. Minsk currently does not have the capability to muster such a force. We therefore presume that Ukrainians are predominantly concerned about small incursions coupled with the occupation of a small area of force. Ukraine of a small area to force. I don't know what that is, Ukraine. We therefore assess that Ukraine's primary concern is small-scale incursions aimed at seizing limited territory to compel a redeployment of Ukrainian forces from other regions. While the probability of such a scenario remains low, it cannot be entirely ruled out. Determining whether Lukashenko would actually take this step is beyond what open source can provide. However, what we do know is that the current forces are too small to meet doctrinal requirements for offensive operations. We will continue to monitor Belarusian activities near Ukraine and plan to release an analytical paper on a bilateral exercise in September or October. Now, it's also worth remembering that the other day it was reported that maybe a third of the Belarusian army um, would follow orders and attack Ukraine. It's thought that most of the Belarusians are not hugely in favor of either Russia or indeed Lukashenko. So he was only voted in. Well, he wasn't actually voted in. He was placed by Putin in some very controversial elections that show that he's a puppet ruler, and he owes Putin for his rulership. But he also knows that himself. He knows that. And so, therefore, he's walking this fine line between trying to do as much as he can to keep Putin happy. Remember, his foreign minister was assassinated as a warning shot to Lukashenko to stay on course. But he's not being so overt that he's actually doing stuff that will incur the wrath of his own population and lead to his own demise. So he's caught between a rock and a hard place, Lukashenko, and I doubt that he would get involved in any kind of large scale offensive. Right, going now to Kursk, Ukrainian servicemen are establishing good neighborly relations with local residents in Sudzha who just simply want to not be bothered. This is one of these other really interesting videos that shows people, locals, just going, "Are you going to harm us?" And Ukrainian soldiers going, "No," and they're saying, "Well, we're all right with that. Just don't bother us." So Ukrainian says, "What's up?" To these locals. "We did washing in the river." That tells you enough. "No one's hurting you?" No. "Tell us, can we go back home to live?" They asked the soldier. "Of course you can." "Will anyone bother us?" "Who would bother you?" They say, as in Russian disinformation or state television or whatever, they say there are rumors that yours walk around houses killing. "God forbid, walk freely," says the Ukrainian soldier. "No one's killing you. Don't listen." As in, don't listen to the propaganda. And so these guys, he says, go and live. If you feel safe at home, then please, And she says, as long as we're not bothered, no one will bother you. And so they go on and get on with their day. And that's what you want to see. I mean, that is doing warfare in line with international law. But then we have another woman sitting on the pavement with some water, talking to what looks like a reporter in Kursk. She says, "I don't have a positive attitude towards the Russian government at all, because all their power is for themselves and no one thinks about the people. It's good that you brought us food and water and you let us go shopping and everywhere else. The Ukrainian military are good guys. They took us to the stores in their cars. They are good guys, very good." So the residents of the city of Sudzha in Russia's Kursk region can walk around in the city. They are not detained or restricted in their movements. Of course, this is not only the right moral thing to do, but this is also the right strategic thing to do, where Russia just do not treat the Ukrainians with this kind of respect. They also don't treat their own shops. We've seen images or videos of the Russian soldiers looting Wildberry and some of the Russian citizens looting their own neighbors and businesses in their own regions in Kursk. As soon as the Russian army kind of deserted them, it all turned to chaos, and that didn't happen in Ukraine. And now we've got Ukrainian soldiers treating the local Russians really well. What you want these Russians to do is then start telling their neighbors, not their neighbors, their relatives about this in far-flung places around Russia, to counteract the disinformation that the Russian state government are peddling concerning the terrible Ukrainian soldiers torturing and killing Russians. You want these images to get out there, these videos to get out there and be shared widely, and you want them to speak to people, speak to lots of people. Okay, Ukrainian troops have occupied 2 more settlements in Kursk region, according to Zelensky. They've advanced, I think, somewhere like 3 kilometers in the region, taking a couple of settlements. Russian authorities have yet to react to that statement. And then we have Roman Alekin. I reported this yesterday. A well-known Russian Z blogger bluntly tells residents of 4 districts in Kursk region that they don't evacuate in time, Putin's army will turn them into dust when the counteroffensive will happen. So the warning is that it's not the Ukrainians are going to kill you, it's the Russian counterattack that's going to kill you. So get out of Dodge. Wow. This could be CGI, but this is, if not, this is an amazing picture. The billboard said stability. So you got a Putin billboard, stability, and behind it, a massive burning oil. I think oil depot. That's probably from somewhere like the oil refinery that we've just been talking about, Task. Um, incredible picture. I hope it's not CGI. Anyway, Pekka Kallioniemi then says, because he's Finnish, so according to a Finnish newspaper, there is a power struggle going on inside the Kremlin. Sources close to the leadership claim that there are two camps fighting for power. That a former FSB director and Kremlin hawk and conspiracy theorist, Nikolai Patrushev. So he's a very much pro Putin guy. Thought possibly more of a natural leader, Patrushev, originally than Putin himself. Could be thought to be the next leader after Putin, but there might be this fight between Patrushev and oligarch Sergei Chemezov. So sources to IS a frank power struggle is underway or a frantic power struggle is underway in the Kremlin. Is the translation that Finnish source there. There is a strong turmoil in the Kremlin under the surface, particular battle of power between two men. So something to keep an eye on, something we've been hoping and wondering would happen. It could just be psyops. Who knows how true that is? Anyway, it's been a long one. A lot has happened overnight. Sorry to spend so long on it. Take care. Speak soon.